the vow that broke his heart. The most powerful man in the city stood at the altar, his face carved from ice. Adrian Moretti didn't believe in love. He believed in control. And the trembling woman in white beside him? She was nothing more than a business transaction. Their first night together, he made one thing brutally clear. This marriage meant nothing. No affection, no intimacy, no hope. But what happens when the heart you've locked away begins to break free? When jealousy burns hotter than any bullet wound? When the woman you pushed away becomes the only thing worth fighting for? If you want to see how love can shatter even the coldest heart, stay until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The cathedral bells rang with a sound that felt more like a death knell than a celebration. Naomi Valenti stood at the massive oak doors, her fingers trembling as they clutched the cascading bouquet of white roses and jasmine. The dress, custom-made Italian silk that cost more than most people earned in a year, felt like a beautiful prison. Every bead, every crystal, every delicate thread of lace was perfect. And yet, she had never felt more trapped in her life. Through the narrow opening between the doors, she could see the sea of faces waiting inside. Hundreds of them. Politicians, business moguls, underworld figures dressed in expensive suits that barely concealed the violence in their eyes. This wasn't a wedding, this was a merger, a strategic alliance between two of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast. And she was the collateral. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Her father's voice came from beside her, warm but weighted with something she couldn't quite name. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. Naomi turned to look at Vincent Valenti, the man who had raised her with love and protection, who had given her every advantage in life, education, travel, opportunities. The man who had also just sold her future to secure a business deal. "Papa," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the organ music that had begun to swell inside the cathedral. "I don't want to do this." Vincent's jaw tightened. For just a moment, something flickered in his dark eyes, pain maybe, or the ghost of paternal instinct warring with pragmatism. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Adrian Moretti is a powerful man," he said quietly, his hand tightening on her arm. "This marriage secures our family's position for generations. You understand that, don't you? This is bigger than what any of us want." Bigger than love, Naomi thought bitterly. Bigger than happiness. Bigger than me. She had met Adrian Moretti exactly 3 times before today. The first time was at a charity gala 6 months ago, where he'd acknowledged her with nothing more than a brief nod and eyes as cold as a winter storm. The second time was when their fathers sat them down together to announce the engagement, a 15-minute meeting where Adrian spoke perhaps 10 words, all of them related to logistics and expectations. The third time was last week, for a formal engagement photo shoot where they stood side by side like strangers at a bus stop, neither touching nor speaking unless absolutely necessary. She knew virtually nothing about the man she was about to marry, except what everyone else knew. Adrian Moretti was feared. He had taken over his father's empire at 25 after the old man suffered a debilitating stroke. In the 7 years since, he had consolidated power, eliminated rivals, and built an organization so efficient and ruthless that even mentioning his name made hardened criminals nervous. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't gamble. He had no known vices, no weaknesses, no scandals. There were rumors, of course, whispers about his brutal efficiency, about enemies who disappeared without a trace, about business deals sealed with blood rather than signatures. But there was never proof, never evidence. Adrian Moretti operated in shadows so deep that even light seemed afraid to touch him. And now she was about to become his wife. The doors opened fully and the organ music swelled into the wedding march. Naomi's breath caught in her throat as every face in the cathedral turned toward her. The aisle stretched ahead like a path to the gallows, lined with white roses and candles that flickered in the afternoon light, streaming through stained glass windows. And at the end of that aisle stood Adrian Moretti. He was tall, at least 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out his custom black tuxedo perfectly. His dark hair was styled with meticulous precision, not a strand out of place. His face was all sharp angles and classical Italian features, strong jaw, straight nose, high cheekbones. He was objectively one of the most handsome men Naomi had ever seen, but his eyes were what made her blood run cold. Gray. storm cloud gray, and completely, utterly empty. He watched her approach with the same expression he might give a quarterly financial report. Mild interest, perhaps, but nothing resembling emotion. Certainly nothing resembling desire or affection or even basic human warmth. Naomi's father walked her down the aisle, past rows of guests who whispered behind their hands, and jewelry that glittered like warning signs. She recognized faces from the newspaper, senators, judges, business leaders, all of them here to witness the union of two empires, none of them here for love. When they reached the altar, Vincent lifted Naomi's veil and kissed her forehead. "Be smart," he whispered against her skin. Then he placed her hand in Adrian's and stepped back. Adrian's hand was large, warm, and completely impersonal. He held her fingers with the same casual indifference one might hold a briefcase. When she dared to look up at his face, she found him staring straight ahead at the priest, his expression revealing nothing. The ceremony was traditional, formal, and utterly devoid of joy. The priest droned through the standard vows, for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. Promises that should have meant everything. Promises that, in this cathedral, meant absolutely nothing. "Do you, Adrian Michael Moretti, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was deep, controlled, and carried no more emotion than if he'd been confirming a dinner reservation. "And do you, Naomi Isabella Valenti, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Naomi opened her mouth, and for one wild moment she considered saying no, considered running, considered anything other than binding herself legally and eternally to the empty-eyed stranger beside her. But she felt the weight of hundreds of gazes on her back, felt the suffocating pressure of family obligation and strategic necessity, felt the absolute impossibility of escape. "I do," she whispered. The priest smiled, oblivious to the tragedy he was witnessing. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Adrian turned to face her fully for the first time since she'd reached the altar. His gray eyes met hers, and for just a fraction of a second, she thought she saw something flicker in their depths. But before she could identify it, his hand came up to cup her jaw, businesslike, efficient, and he leaned down to press his lips to hers. The kiss lasted exactly 3 seconds. His lips were warm but completely unmoving. There was no passion, no tenderness, not even the pretense of affection. It was a contractual obligation being fulfilled, nothing more. When he pulled back, Naomi felt something inside her chest crack. Not her heart breaking, not yet, but the first hairline fracture in whatever foolish hope she'd been carrying that maybe, somehow, this could become real. The guests erupted in applause that echoed off the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. Adrian took Naomi's hand and turned to face the crowd, his expression proud and victorious. But his hand on hers felt like a shackle. They walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, past smiling faces and raised champagne glasses. Outside, a fleet of black luxury cars waited to take them to the reception at the Moretti estate. Photographers jostled for position, their cameras flashing like lightning strikes. Adrian guided Naomi into the back of the lead car, a Rolls-Royce with bulletproof windows and privacy glass. The door closed with a heavy thunk, sealing them in silence. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Naomi sat stiffly in her wedding dress, hyper-aware of every inch of space between them. Adrian pulled out his phone and began typing, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the screen. "The reception will last approximately 4 hours," he said without looking up. "We'll stay for the first dance and the toasts. After that, we can leave whenever you'd like. I have a conference call scheduled for 8. Naomi stared at him, incredulous. "You have a conference call scheduled on our wedding night?" "It's with our Tokyo office. The timing is unavoidable." "Right," she said flatly. "Of course." Adrian finally looked up from his phone, his gray eyes assessing her with clinical detachment. "I assume you understand the parameters of this arrangement." "Arrangement?" Naomi repeated, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "Is that what we're calling a marriage?" "Let's be clear about what this is," Adrian said, his tone matter-of-fact. "This union serves a specific purpose. It consolidates our family's business interests and provides strategic advantages for both organizations. Beyond that, I have no expectations of you, and you should have none of me." Naomi felt anger beginning to burn through the numbness that had carried her through the ceremony. You could have at least pretended to be happy for appearances. I don't pretend, Adrian said simply. It's a waste of energy. Our guests got exactly what they came for, a spectacle and a power shift. Nothing more was required. What about me? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. What did I get? Adrian's expression didn't change. Security, protection, a position of significant social influence. The Moretti name carries considerable weight. How romantic. Romance, Adrian said, turning back to his phone, is a neurological illusion designed by evolution to facilitate reproduction. It has no place in a strategic partnership. Naomi felt something hot and sharp lodge in her throat. She turned to look out the window, watching the city blur past through tears she absolutely refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of him. The Moretti estate was a sprawling compound in the countryside, surrounded by high walls and security that would make a military base jealous. The main house was a modern architectural marvel, all glass and steel and clean lines, perched on a hillside with views that stretched for miles. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom, a space that could have held 200 people comfortably, but felt intimate with only half that number. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white silk and centerpieces of roses and orchids. A live orchestra played soft jazz from a raised platform. It was objectively stunning, the kind of wedding reception people dreamed about, and Naomi had never felt more alone in her life. The first dance was a choreographed performance. Adrian led her onto the floor with the same mechanical precision he seemed to apply to everything. His hand rested on her waist with no more pressure than absolutely necessary. They moved through a basic waltz while hundreds of eyes watched and cameras flashed. Smile, Adrian murmured, his lips barely moving. People are watching. Naomi fixed a bright smile on her face, the kind she'd perfected at countless social functions. Is this acceptable? Or should I look more adoringly at you? This is fine, Adrian said. Believable but not excessive. When the song finally ended, Naomi felt relief flood through her, but it was short-lived. The evening stretched ahead with agonizing slowness. Speeches from family members praising the union, toasts celebrating their future, dances with relatives and business associates who all wanted a piece of the new Mrs. Moretti. Through it all, Adrian remained at her side, playing his role with flawless precision. He touched her when it was expected, smiled at the appropriate moments, made small talk with guests with practiced charm. To everyone watching, they looked like a perfect couple. But Naomi could feel the wall between them, invisible but absolute. Whenever the performance didn't require it, Adrian retreated into that cold distance, his eyes flickering to his watch, his attention clearly elsewhere. At 7:45, he leaned close to her ear. I need to take that call. You can stay if you'd like or come with me. Either way is acceptable. I'll come, Naomi said, desperate for any excuse to leave the suffocating crowd. They made their exit with appropriate fanfare. More photos, more congratulations, more lies about happiness and futures. Then Adrian guided her to the car, and they drove in silence back to what was now, apparently, her home. The master suite was on the third floor of the main house, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. There was a sitting room, a massive bedroom with a California king bed, 2 walk-in closets the size of studio apartments, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. Your things have been moved into the right closet, Adrian said, already pulling off his jacket and loosening his tie. The bathroom is shared, but I typically use it between 5:30 and 6 in the morning, so we shouldn't have scheduling conflicts. Is there anything you need before I take this call? Naomi stared at him, this stranger who was now her husband, and felt something inside her finally break. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouting, just a quiet, devastating crack. No, she said softly. I don't need anything. Good. Adrian moved to the bedroom's sitting area, where a laptop was already set up on a desk. He sat down, adjusted the screen, and within seconds was deep in conversation with people on the other side of the world, discussing market trends and expansion strategies in flawless Japanese. Naomi stood in the middle of the massive bedroom in her wedding dress, completely invisible to the man who had just vowed to spend his life with her. She moved mechanically to the closet, finding her clothes carefully organized alongside designer pieces she'd never seen before. apparently part of her new wardrobe. She changed out of the wedding dress, hanging it carefully on a special hanger, then pulled on comfortable pajamas. When she emerged, Adrian was still on his call. She could see him through the open doorway, his face illuminated by the laptop screen, completely absorbed in his work. The bed was enormous, but Naomi chose to curl up on the far right side, as close to the edge as possible. She pulled the covers up to her chin and stared out the windows at the darkness beyond. This was her life now, this beautiful, empty prison. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke to the sound of Adrian moving around the room. The clock on the nightstand read 1:47 a.m. She kept her eyes closed, her breathing steady, pretending to sleep. She heard him in the bathroom, water running, the electric toothbrush, the medicine cabinet opening and closing. Then his footsteps approached the bed. The mattress dipped slightly as he got in on the far left side, maintaining the maximum possible distance between them. For several long minutes, there was only silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, Adrian spoke into the darkness. "I'm sorry." Naomi's eyes flew open, but she didn't move, didn't respond. She wasn't even sure she'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry," he said again, still quiet but clearer this time. "I know this isn't what you wanted. It isn't what anyone should want, but it's what we have. And I promise you, I will never hurt you. I will never be unfaithful. I will protect you and provide for you. Those things at least I can guarantee." Naomi lay perfectly still, her heart pounding. She wanted to turn over, to look at him, to ask him what he meant. But something in his voice, a fragility she hadn't heard before, made her stay silent. After another moment, she heard him settle into his pillow. His breathing gradually slowed and deepened, and Naomi lay awake in the darkness, married to a stranger who apologized to her sleeping form but couldn't look her in the eye when she was conscious, and wondered how she was going to survive this. The next morning, she woke to an empty bed. The clock read 9:15 a.m. On the nightstand beside her was a note written in precise, angular handwriting. "Had to leave early for a meeting. Maria will prepare whatever you'd like for breakfast. Make yourself at home. The estate is yours to explore." Naomi held the note, reading it 3 times, searching for any hint of warmth or personality, but it was as impersonal as everything else about him. She spent that first day exploring her new home, guided by Maria, the head housekeeper, a kind woman in her 50s who'd worked for the Moretti family for over 20 years. The estate was massive, a home gym, an indoor pool, a library with floor-to-ceiling books, a home theater, formal dining rooms, casual living spaces, offices, guest suites. There was even a panic room hidden behind a bookshelf in the library. "Mr. Moretti is very particular about security," Maria explained gently. "He wants to make sure you're always safe." "Where's Mr. Moretti?" Naomi asked. "At the office, most likely. He keeps long hours. Sometimes he doesn't return until very late." That became the pattern. Naomi would wake to an empty bed and a polite note. She'd spend her days reading in the library, swimming in the pool, or staring out windows at the manicured grounds. Adrian would return late, sometimes midnight, sometimes later, moving quietly through the bedroom like a ghost. On the rare occasions when they ate dinner together, the conversations were stilted and formal. Adrian asked about her day with the interest of a hotel concierge. She asked about his work and received vague, sanitized answers. They were 2 strangers sharing a living space, nothing more. Weeks passed, then a month, then 2. Naomi learned the rhythms of the house, the schedules of the staff, the precise routine Adrian followed with mechanical consistency. She learned that he was never late, never forgot an appointment, never showed anger or joy or frustration. He was perfectly controlled at all times. She also learned that despite his emotional distance, he was unfailingly considerate in practical ways. He noticed when she mentioned liking a particular author and ordered their complete works for the library. When she casually mentioned missing her favorite coffee from a cafe downtown, it appeared in the kitchen the next morning. He never made a show of these gestures, never sought acknowledgement. They simply appeared, like gifts from a benevolent ghost. It was maddening. She could have hated him if he were cruel. She could have fought him if he were controlling. But this careful, distant consideration was harder to process. It kept her off balance, never quite sure what she was dealing with. 3 months into the marriage, Naomi decided she needed to reclaim some part of herself. She began having lunch with friends from before the wedding. women who'd known her when she was still just Naomi Valenti, not Mrs. Adrian Moretti. She joined a book club, started taking art classes at a community center. Adrian never objected. In fact, he encouraged it. "It's important that you maintain your own interests," he said one evening over dinner, his tone perfectly reasonable. "This doesn't have to consume your entire identity." "How generous of you," Naomi said, unable to keep the bitterness entirely out of her voice. Adrian's eyes flickered toward her, something unreadable passing through them. But he simply returned to his meal without comment. 4 months in, Naomi realized she couldn't remember the last time they'd touched beyond the obligatory hand-holding at the occasional business function they attended together. Their life had settled into a strange kind of platonic coexistence, polite, considerate, and completely devoid of intimacy. She tried not to think about it, tried not to acknowledge the loneliness that had become her constant companion. But late at night, lying in that enormous bed with Adrian on the far side, she sometimes felt so utterly alone it hurt to breathe. Then came the night that changed everything. It started with a headache. Naomi woke up around 3 a.m. with pressure building behind her eyes, her skin feeling too hot and too cold at the same time. She got up carefully, not wanting to wake Adrian, and made her way to the bathroom. The room spun. She gripped the counter trying to steady herself, but her legs felt like water. The last thing she remembered was the bathroom floor coming up to meet her and a voice, Adrian's voice, calling her name with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. Fear. When she woke again, there was cool pressure on her forehead and a hand holding hers. She blinked her eyes open slowly, her vision blurry and confused. Adrian was sitting on the edge of the bed, his hair disheveled, his shirt partially unbuttoned, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that took her breath away. "Naomi," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on her name. "Can you hear me?" "What happened?" she whispered, her throat dry and painful. "You collapsed. You have a fever, 103 degrees. The doctor is on his way, but I've been trying to bring it down." His hand tightened on hers. "How do you feel?" "Like I was hit by a truck," she admitted. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "That's fairly accurate." The doctor arrived 20 minutes later, a discreet family physician who examined Naomi thoroughly and determined she had a severe case of the flu complicated by dehydration. "Bed rest, fluids, and these medications," the doctor said, handing Adrian several prescriptions. "She should start improving within 48 hours. If the fever doesn't break by tomorrow night, call me immediately." After the doctor left, Adrian disappeared and returned with water, medication, and a tray of soup that Maria must have prepared. "You need to eat something," he said, helping her sit up against the pillows. "I'm not hungry." "I don't care. You need nutrients." There was something different in his voice, still controlled, but with an edge that suggested he wasn't open to negotiation. Naomi found herself eating the soup, mostly because she was too weak to argue. Adrian stayed. That was what surprised her most. He didn't retreat to his office or bury himself in work. He stayed in the bedroom, working from his laptop but never more than a few feet away, checking her temperature every hour, making sure she took her medicine on time, bringing her water and juice and more soup. "You don't have to do this," Naomi said at one point, her voice still hoarse. "I'm sure you have important things." "Nothing is more important than this," Adrian said, cutting her off with a firmness that left no room for argument. That night, when Naomi's fever spiked again and she started shivering uncontrollably, Adrian didn't hesitate. He climbed into the bed beside her, breaking the invisible barrier they'd maintained for 4 months, and pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. "What are you doing?" she asked through chattering teeth. "You're freezing. Body heat will help." His body was warm and solid against hers, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Naomi was too sick and too exhausted to overthink it. She simply let herself relax into the warmth, her shivering gradually subsiding. For the first time since their wedding night, she fell asleep in her husband's arms. When she woke the next morning, the fever had broken. She felt weak and wrung out, but human again. And Adrian was still there, his arms still around her, his breath stirring her hair. She shifted slightly, and his eyes opened immediately, alert, concerned. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Better," she whispered. Relief flooded his features, genuine, unguarded relief. For just a moment, she saw past the walls to the man underneath, and what she saw there made her heart skip. But then he seemed to realize how closely they were pressed together, how intimate the moment had become. The walls slammed back into place. He pulled away, putting distance between them once more. "Good," he said, his voice returning to that careful neutrality. "I'll have Maria bring you breakfast." He left the room without looking back, and Naomi lay there, still able to feel the ghost of his warmth against her skin, and wondered what the hell had just happened. Over the following days, as Naomi recovered her strength, Adrian retreated back into his carefully constructed fortress of emotional distance. The man who had held her through fever dreams and checked her temperature with gentle hands vanished like morning mist, replaced once again by the polite stranger she'd married. But something had shifted. Naomi couldn't unsee what she'd glimpsed during those vulnerable hours. The concern in his eyes, the tenderness in his touch, the relief that had flooded his features when her fever broke. He could pretend it hadn't happened, could rebuild his walls brick by brick, but she knew now that there was something beneath that icy exterior, something he was desperately trying to hide. The question was why. 2 weeks after her illness, Naomi was back to full health and increasingly restless. The mansion, for all its luxury, felt like a beautiful cage. She'd spent months adapting to this strange half-life, but the brief glimpse of Adrian's humanity had awakened something in her, a refusal to simply accept this empty existence. She started pushing boundaries. Small things at first. Instead of eating breakfast alone, she began timing her mornings to coincide with Adrian's rigid schedule. The first time she walked into the dining room at 6:15 a.m., already dressed and alert, he looked up from his newspaper with genuine surprise. "You're awake early," he observed, his tone neutral. "I thought we could eat together," Naomi said, pouring herself coffee from the silver service. "We are married, after all." Something flickered in his eyes. Wariness, maybe, or calculation. But he simply folded his newspaper and gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course." They ate in silence for several minutes. The only sounds, the clink of silverware and the rustle of Adrian's paper. Naomi studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. The precise way he cut his food, the methodical pattern he followed, the way he seemed to exist inside an invisible bubble that nothing could penetrate. "I've been thinking about getting more involved in the family business," she said suddenly. Adrian's knife paused halfway through a piece of toast. He looked up at her, his gray eyes sharp and assessing. "Why?" "Because I'm intelligent, educated, and capable, and because sitting in this house day after day is slowly driving me insane." "You have friends, activities. You're free to pursue whatever interests you'd like." "I want to contribute," Naomi pressed. "I have a degree in international business, and I speak 4 languages. Surely there's some area where I could be useful." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he nodded slowly. "The Charitable Foundation. We maintain several non-profit organizations, community development, education grants, small business loans. They could use someone with your language skills to coordinate international partnerships. Would that interest you?" Naomi felt a small surge of triumph. "Yes, that would interest me very much. I'll have my assistant set up a meeting with the foundation director." Adrian returned to his breakfast, apparently considering the matter closed. But Naomi wasn't finished. "Thank you for taking care of me when I was sick." His hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his fork. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing to me." Adrian's jaw clenched. For several seconds he didn't respond, didn't even look at her. Then he stood abruptly, folding his napkin with precise movements. "I have a meeting at 7. Enjoy your breakfast." He left the room before she could say another word. Naomi sat alone at the table, frustrated but also strangely energized. She'd gotten a reaction from him, small but real. The ice wasn't impenetrable after all. It just required the right kind of pressure. True to his word, Adrian arranged for her to meet with Marcus Chen, the director of the Moretti Family Foundation. Marcus was a sharp-eyed man in his 40s with an easy smile and genuine passion for the foundation's work. "Mrs. Moretti, it's a pleasure," he said, shaking her hand warmly in his office downtown. "Adrian speaks highly of your qualifications." "He does?" Naomi couldn't hide her surprise. Marcus smiled knowingly. "He does. In fact, he specifically mentioned that we'd be foolish not to utilize your expertise." He's right. Our international partnerships have been struggling because of language and cultural barriers. Having someone who can navigate those complexities would be invaluable. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus walked Naomi through the foundation's operations, the community centers they funded, the scholarship programs, the microloans helping immigrants start businesses. It was impressive work, genuinely meaningful, and Naomi felt herself becoming genuinely excited for the first time in months. "When can I start?" she asked. "How about Monday?" Naomi dove into the work with enthusiasm that surprised even herself. She coordinated with partners in Mexico City, Seoul, and Lagos. She reviewed grant applications and helped develop new program criteria. She visited community centers and met the people whose lives the foundation was actually changing. It was purposeful. It was challenging. It made her feel like herself again. Adrian never mentioned her work directly, but she noticed small changes. He started asking vague questions over dinner. "How was your day?" That seemed almost genuine. When she mentioned a particularly difficult negotiation with a partner organization in Barcelona, he offered advice that was actually helpful. Once, she came home late from a site visit to find him still awake, reading in the sitting room. "You didn't have to wait up," she said, surprised. "I wasn't waiting up," he said, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking to her face with something that looked almost like relief before he buried himself back in his book. These small moments accumulated like snow, individually insignificant but gradually building into something she couldn't quite ignore. Adrian was still distant, still carefully controlled, but the wall between them felt fractionally less impenetrable. 3 months into her work with the foundation, Naomi had lunch with her closest friend from before the marriage, Sophia Ricci, a vivacious art dealer who'd known Naomi since college. "Look at you," Sophia said, gesturing with her wine glass at the outdoor cafe where they sat. "You're glowing. The Ice King must be thawing." Naomi laughed, but it came out more bitter than she intended. "Hardly. We're basically roommates who occasionally attend the same social functions. So still separate beds? Same bed, opposite edges. There's probably a mile of mattress between us." Sophia shook her head. "I'll never understand that man. You're gorgeous."